All right, let's start with the Cincinnati Bengals. Let's start with the breaking news there as well. So, we're kind of getting ready for the show, going, okay, how are we going to attack the Cincinnati Bengals here today? We've done the Duke Tobin stuff a lot. We've done the Zach Taylor stuff a lot. And then you get the clip from Rossini. You get the column from Jason Williams. All right, there's some stuff there. But then you get some big-time news. Quinn Ewers going to be making a start against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals play in Miami. They go down to South Beach. They get away from Paycor Stadium, the city of Cincinnati. I think, when you're in a situation that the Bengals are in, this probably is a good thing, right? Just to go down, right, somewhere far away. You're going down to Florida, just you, just the team, and just kind of distance yourself from some of the distractions and some of the bad things that candidly are transpiring in the city of Cincinnati as it revolves around your organization. And you get some good news here, right? So I understand the fan base out there. The mindset probably has switched for a lot of folks, right? Going from, let's win games, let's try to get into the postseason, to, the Bengals are eliminated from the postseason. Let's lose and get as good of a pick as we possibly can. Well, as we've talked about several times here on this show, the fans can think that way and want those things to happen. Organization, players, coaches, they can't afford to go out there and do that. So it's big that Cincinnati goes in and tries to get a win against Miami. Miami, of course, has a better record, but I think the Bengals have technically the better team. Now, they haven't played like it for much of the year, as we know, with only 4 wins here at this point, but I think they have a better chance at winning going against a guy like Quinn Ewers as opposed to going against a guy like Tua Tagovailoa. Now, I'll be completely transparent here. I was a big Tua guy. He was an incredible college quarterback. We all know this. We all understand this. The heroics as a true freshman coming in for Jalen Hurts at halftime against Georgia and leading that team, that Alabama team with Nick Saban, that come-from-behind victory in the national title game was awesome, and then he kind of just took off from there. Had some injury concerns, obviously, at Alabama, and that kind of derailed his final year there as well, and that was kind of the big concern for Tua coming out was, okay, he's this undersized guy, doesn't have this big arm, has an injury concern, right? And he ends up going above Justin Herbert. I would have done the same thing in the moment, and I think we all know pretty obviously here at this point, Herbert should have gone right behind Joe Burrow and not Tua Tagovailoa. But it's been an up and down stretch for Tua. He starts out years really well when it's optimal conditions and he's down in sunny Miami, Florida. He can hit the back foot. He can get rid of the ball quickly when he had the speed of Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. When Mike McDaniel first got to Miami, it was one of the most prolific offenses in the National Football League. That's just the case. And then things kind of went downhill as the season went on, and then they find themselves in these colder games, and they really, really struggle, right, throwing the football. And that was on display once again on Monday night against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Dolphins had gotten hot and actually were still fighting for their playoff lives in the game on Monday night, but their total operation and identity as a team totally shifted when they started having success. McDaniel, of course, was the run game coordinator with the San Francisco 49ers. That's kind of how he cut his teeth in this league, right? He was always a run game guy, and then he got to Miami. He's like, I got Waddle and Tyreek Hill. We're slinging this son of a gun around, and that's what he did. But he kind of got back to his roots. I give him a lot of credit for doing that, and we talked about it on the show yesterday. McDaniel, he's a bit of a quirky guy, sometimes says some questionable things, not that necessarily alpha in the room, but I would probably keep Mike McDaniel based on what he has done over the course of the past few weeks. I think it's pretty safe to say here at this point they had a quarterback issue in Miami. So they changed their identity. They were running the football a lot more, having great success in the run game with Achane, which, by the way, we'll kind of get into this later in the week. That is a massive concern for the Cincinnati Bengals before we move into this game here on Sunday. But they didn't ask really Tua to do much, right? They were only throwing it, probably 20-ish times a game, not asking him to chuck it down the field, and they were having a lot of success running. And you can do that when, you get the ball early and you have success and you score points and you don't find yourselves behind multiple scores. That ended up not happening, of course, in the game Monday night against Pittsburgh. They had success moving the ball, but Tua just did some bad things in the game. He missed some easy throws, and it's so obvious. Aaron Rodgers is 42 years of age. I understand Aaron Rodgers has one of the best arms of all time, but just watching these two guys play quarterback, you're like, this guy's 42 years old, right? He's got a broken hand on his non-throwing arm. He's cutting it through the wind way better than Tua. And shoot, he's moving around way better than Tua there as well. When you have the limitations that Tua has, right? Height, arm strength, right? You have to have something to be able to overcome those traits, like athletic ability. He doesn't even have that as well. I don't know if it's the injuries that have added up. I don't know if he's put on some weight to try to help him stay more healthy, whatever the case is. But when he was at Alabama, he could move a little bit. I mean, he can't move at all here in the NFL. I'm watching him try to escape the pocket, and Troy Aikman alluded to this on the broadcast where it's like, sometimes when Mahomes leaves the pocket or Burrow leaves the pocket, you get all excited. You go, oh, something awesome's about to happen right here. When Tua leaves the pocket, you go, oh, Lord, something horrible is going to happen for the Miami Dolphins offense. And that's just kind of been the story of this year for Tua and really the story of the past couple for him as well. So they decided to give him big-time money, and I kind of went on a rant about this the other day as well. It's like these organizations, these front offices, these general managers, they find themselves in a spot where their quarterback's rookie contract is done. The rookie quarterback played solid throughout the deal, and it's like, oh, let's just give him a ton of money. I don't understand why that always happens in the National Football League. It really confuses me, right? Why does he have to be one of the highest paid guys in the league just because you won some games with him as a rookie quarterback, right? Just evaluate the situation. Is he one of the best quarterbacks in the National Football League? No, right? And don't overthink it. He's a short guy that can't really move and doesn't have a strong arm, and you play in a division where you got to go on the road with Buffalo, New York, and New England. Late in the year, it's going to be freezing cold, and if it's below 40 degrees, he hasn't won a single game in the National Football League, and they gave him a ton of money. Now, the GM, of course, has been fired since then, but I just don't get it. And the Kyler Murray stuff with Arizona, why? The Daniel Jones stuff when he was with the Giants, why? Yeah, you can have some success. You can win some games. You could keep the team afloat. Shoot, you could even get to the postseason. That doesn't mean you should be one of the top highest paid guys in the National Football League. So the Dolphins made a move to bench him, and I think they kind of had to at this spot. Again, I'm not going to sit here and say McDaniel was great. I think some of the stuff going on with their organization in the offseason was not good. You had other teams talking about the Miami Dolphins in these joint practices like, hey, they don't know what the heck they're doing. I mean, what are they doing out here? They're, not on the same page. They got no organization. They got no leadership. That's an indictment on the coach, but you also have to evaluate the season. They started off really bad. People could have quit. People could have quit on Mike McDaniel. They rallied together, got some wins, found a new identity running the football, and it's pretty clear that there's some talent on this team, and they could win games. Not necessarily a playoff team, good enough to win games, and their quarterback's holding them back. So they make the move, bench Tua, go with Quinn Ewers. And I think this is a massive break for the Cincinnati Bengals, if you're talking about them winning football games, right? They have a better chance of winning against Quinn Ewers than they do against Tua Tagovailoa. Again, they're playing in Miami, right? So Tua probably would have played fine in this game against the Cincinnati Bengals. But Zach Wilson has been the backup for the majority of his career. The majority of this season. For the Miami Dolphins, they leapfrog him, and they go with Quinn Ewers. Their rookie quarterback spent a couple of years as a starter at Texas. As I mentioned at the top of the show, was a top recruit, had a cup of coffee with Ohio State, ultimately decides to go back home and play for Texas. And look, I respect Quinn Ewers. I respect how he handles himself, how his teammates rallied around him, but it's very clear that he's not going to be an NFL starting quarterback, and I don't expect him to play particularly well in this game. If he does, it's probably going to be just general incompetency of the Bengals defensively, right? So I think there's already people speculating like, oh, this could be that Mike White game. We all remember that against the New York Jets several years ago where Ewers just kind of goes out there and balls out. I don't know if it's going to happen. Again, the Bengals defense stinks, of course, so maybe it will. But I remember just kind of watching him at Texas. The arm strength didn't end up developing, I think, the way a lot of people thought when he was first coming out of high school. The mechanics are really, really bad for Quinn Ewers. His lower half, we talked about how great Joe Burrow's lower half is, right, and how he's just always in line with his target. Everything is in sync. Everything is in order. Quinn Ewers is all over the place with his lower half, and he doesn't have the arm to overcome that like some of the other guys in this league do. And I expect him to make some inaccurate throws. I expect him to make some poor decisions in the game as well. And this is another great opportunity. We talked about the Bengals, how in that Buffalo game, get the ball, put some pressure on them immediately. I think that's kind of how you should operate here throughout the rest of the season. I've always been kind of a defer guy, get it to start the second half, but considering you're eliminated from the playoffs, like you got to try to get some wins here, and you got to start fast. I think if you start fast, you go down and score against Miami and put Quinn Ewers in a spot where he's got to throw the ball and can't just turn around and hand it off to Achane. I think you have an opportunity to separate yourselves in this game. So the Bengals against Tua were 2.5-point favorites. That's what it was this morning. I don't know if it has shifted off that. I think it should, right? It's a seventh-round quarterback making his first start in a game. So I would anticipate, this is a better situation for the Bengals to be in. But then, of course, there are other people out there that say, well, that's ridiculous. Why you want to lose these games. You want to have a better draft pick. I get that rationale. To me, that's not really something I process until like the last game of the year. And I've talked about this on the show this week. Zach said Joe's going to go the rest of the way. I'm not convinced that he will go that last game. Again, I've been banging the table. play Joe Burrow, but sit him down for the Cleveland game, right? He doesn't need to play that last game. Try to win these next two. See where you're at, right? As far as draft pick goes, because it gets crazy. Like, there's a bunch of teams that could be in contention for the first overall pick here. Crazy stuff happens here down the stretch, and it really flips where teams are picking. I don't really worry about that stuff until the final week of the year. But I'm not sitting down Joe Burrow just to get a better pick. I'm sitting him down because it's Myles Garrett and Cleveland on the other side. That's always a tough physical game. The last thing you want is Joe Burrow to get a serious injury the last week of the game, because now you're at the point of the year, and Mahomes and the Chiefs are going to be dealing with this a little bit too as well. If you get hurt this time of the year, it's not necessarily, we'll see you week 1 next year. That isn't, a guarantee. So if Joe Burrow were to get hurt against Cleveland, that's like, well, that could risk him being ready to go for the start of next year, and that would just be a complete disaster. I'd play him the next 2. I'd sit him down for Cleveland, and you can worry about a draft pick there at this point. I know fans want to probably lose the remaining 3 games here at this point, get a better pick. Wouldn't anticipate that happening. The Bengals, they're a bad team right now. They do losing things. They do bad things, as Joe Burrow, of course, has alluded to. But you would think that they should beat the Dolphins and the Cardinals, or at least pick up 1 win in that matchup. But it's, of course, the 2025 Cincinnati Bengals, so nothing is a guarantee here at this point. But some breaking news here this morning, as Quinn Ewers is going to be the starter for the Miami Dolphins against Cincinnati this week. A couple more Bengals things I want to hit before we move on to the Jizzle James stuff. Diana Russini covers the NFL for The Athletic. She's well-sourced in the league, has a lot of good connections. Say what you want, about her and her reporting style, but I always, tend to trust when I see something that she brings to the table. And, a lot of us were kind of not hitting the panic button. It's funny watching this stuff nationally because we're so close to this. Obviously, you and me, we're not in the locker room. We're not really close. But as someone that, follows the team, right, talks to people, we have people on the show that cover the team, our beat reporters, right? It's just totally different, the connection and the understanding that they have and we have for this team as opposed to some of the national talking heads, right? They're just so disconnected. And people kind of ran with the Joe Burrow stuff and his comments. And, he was depressed, right? That's kind of what it seemed like. He was sad during his press conference this past week, and so many people nationally were like, he wants out of Cincinnati, and that obviously was aggressive and not true. Joe Burrow basically put a stop to that nonsense, and that was good to see. But, our headline on our thumbnail was not great, right? That's kind of how I felt. Not great. Not going to hit the panic button, not going to freak out, say he's leaving, but not great. Right? And Russini came out and said that there's a couple new things that have come out about Joe Burrow. Apparently, he cut the cast off his foot himself. Didn't even have a doctor do it. And he was like, you know what, screw this. I'm cutting this thing off, and we're getting the rehab process underway. Joe Burrow, of course, is a very private person. That's been well documented. And apparently, he didn't really talk to anybody at all. He was just in the training room working his butt off, not cutting his hair either, and just kind of, when they would cut to Joe Burrow, when he started being on the sidelines more, he just looked like a kind of a lost puppy, I would say, and, he was doing everything in his power to come back, and I think in his mind, and we talked about this when he came back before Thanksgiving, in his mind, that psycho competitor that he is, he thought they were going to run the table and get into the playoffs, and I think some of the comments that you saw from Joe Burrow after the Buffalo game was the realization that, it's not going to happen, right, and we all had that realization a long time ago, earlier in the year, right, I had it after the Chicago Bear game. Joe didn't have that until the loss to Buffalo, so I think that's why you saw some of those comments come out the way that they did. And also, I think he's also annoyed with himself, if we're being honest here. Joe Burrow understands that he played his butt off, and it should have been good enough to win in Buffalo, despite the 2 interceptions that he threw. But at the end of the day, he understands if you go into Buffalo and play Josh Allen and throw 2 picks in the fourth quarter, I don't care how, weird they are or how unlucky they are or out of the norm they are. It's 2 interceptions on the road in Buffalo against Josh Allen in the fourth quarter. All right, you're not going to win games like that, and I think he understands that. He was a little bit annoyed with himself, right? And then, of course, after the Baltimore game, he said all the right things and was like, you know what, I got to play better. By the way, the PFF grades came out. That's not gospel by any stretch. That's not the end-all, be-all when you're talking about evaluating performances. I do think PFF is a great company, but there's some holes there. We all understand that. And we said this on the show. That was one of the worst games I have seen Joe Burrow play. He conducted an offense that scored 0 points. That's awful. But this isn't like, J.J. McCarthy stuff, right? Of course, before the Dallas game, right? This isn't Desmond Ridder stuff, Jake Browning stuff, right? It was just horrible for Joe Burrow standards. It wasn't like some god-awful game in the history of the National Football League, and we all understood that and said that. But for Joe Burrow standards, we hold him to this height of, hey, you got to be the best quarterback in the National Football League or a top 3 at minimum quarterback in the National Football League. He ultimately did not live up to that in the game against Baltimore. But as far as, hitting the panic button with Joe Burrow, I think he's just frustrated with losing. I think he's frustrating with, how things have transpired. I think ultimately he's frustrated that they've missed the playoffs 3 consecutive years. Despite all the injuries and how frustrating that is, he's looking up there going, we went to back-to-back AFC title games. This was supposed to be the norm here. We were supposed to be one of the best franchises and teams in the National Football League, and we haven't come close these past few years. So I think that's where his frustration stems from. And, I thought Rossini did some good reporting as it related to that and Joe Burrow. A couple other things. We talked at length about the Daner stuff. Not going to rehash all that as far as Taylor and Duke Tobin coming back next year. But you also have to understand it from an organizational perspective, right? I understand people are very, very frustrated with Zach Taylor. All right, I understand he's got Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, and Trey Hendrickson. Of course, didn't really play this year and has now missed the playoffs 3 consecutive years. I get that is unacceptable. But when you have to look at this through the lens of Mike Brown, right, and the Brown family and the Blackburn family, what do they like to do? They like to stay out of it, right? How many times a year does Mike Brown talk? 2, right? How many times a year does Duke Tobin talk? 2, 3, right? These guys, they hide. They don't talk. And what does Zach Taylor do? He goes to the podium multiple times each and every week and handles these questions perfectly. I understand people are like, I would like to see some anger. I would like to see some rage. Come on, show me something. It's not how Zach Taylor operates, but the organization loves how Zach does that, how he goes in there, he takes blame, he remains calm, he answers all the questions, he spends time with the beat reporters. You got some of these coaches that go in there and they're just one-word answers and they're trying to do whatever they can to get out. Zach Taylor sits down, he gives them time, he answers the questions, and goes from there. And I think the organization loves that about Zach Taylor. And you couple that with him being under contract, they're just not going to move off him, right? Especially when you have the success that Zach Taylor has had over the course of his career as a head coach. He's had some awful years. The first 2 were awful. I don't know if Andy Reid could have done much with the first 2, right? Then you go on these runs. You go to the Super Bowl. You go to the AFC title game. And then it's a fall from grace as you've missed the playoffs the past 3 years. When I'm evaluating Zach Taylor, this is really the first year where there's some more frustration with me towards Zach Taylor, because, you had people frustrated with him when you were going to the Super Bowl and the AFC title game. Like, if you want to pick apart Zach Taylor those 2 years, I can't help you, right? And then last year, it was one of the worst defenses of all time. That's frustrating, but I don't think that is fully his fault. I think that is way more Duke Tobin's fault. And then this year is the year where it's like, Zach, we blamed it on the defense last year. You fired the coordinator. It was supposed to be better, and somehow it's even worse. You lost your quarterback. That's going to give you some more time. We understand that, but this is the first year where I've really said, Zach, this is, he bears a lot of weight here as far as the blame game goes. But ultimately, the organization's not going to move off him. Daner said that. Shouldn't surprise many people. I don't think it's a certain thing at this point. I think if the season ended today, if they had played their final game, it would be certain. But as I've said throughout the week, I think this evaluation process needs to continue over the next 3 weeks for Zach Taylor. And I'll sit here and give my opinion after these 3 games are played, whether I think they should hold on to Zach Taylor or not. But I don't think he should be out of the woods yet. And I don't think even, with Daner's reporting, that was kind of how things ended right now. And as I've said, things are bad right now. Not good at all. Things could also get a lot worse. So we'll monitor that over the course of the next few weeks. And lastly, Jason Williams wrote a column. He's a columnist for The Inquirer. Does a terrific job. We'll try to get Jason on the show here at some point in the near future. But basically the column was the organization, the Bengals, they don't care about you. They don't care about the fans at all. And it's true. As sad as it is to say, it is true. And just kind of walking into that game last week when they lost 24-0, you couldn't help but feel like a bit of a peasant a little bit, right? Because you're sitting here, you're like, man, it's cold as heck out, right? It's taking forever to get in the stadium because they got gates shut down. I was, had ESPN on earlier that morning, and the snow was the seats were covered in snow. I wasn't surprised at all, right? I wasn't too butthurt about the whole thing. I know people are running with that narrative too, but it was the least surprising thing in the world that the Bengals didn't brush off the seats, right? And you just kind of feel like a peasant going in there, and you're like, yeah, this team stinks, but I'm going to show up here just because, I want to see Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase play, right? But they don't care, right? It doesn't matter what the fans do. Doesn't matter what the fans say. Doesn't matter what the beat reporters write. Doesn't matter what the national talking heads say. Doesn't matter what people on talk radio, people like I, say. Doesn't matter at all. And I think that carries some weight in other organizations, truly. I think you talk about blocking out the outside noise, but a lot of these owners, they listen. They listen to sports talk radio. They listen to what the fans are saying, and they make brash decisions. The Brown-Blackburn family, they don't give a rip. Oh, we're not going to buy season tickets and not show up to the game. They don't care. They don't care at all. They're still getting their fat revenue share check from the National Football League when the year's all said and done. They don't care. You're not showing up to their games? They don't care. You're not buying season tickets? They don't care. You're not happy with Duke Tobin and Zach Taylor? They don't care. And unfortunately, that will never change. And that's just something that people are going to have to come to terms with. And it's unfortunate, right? Because you sit there and you buy the gear, you buy the swag, you sit down, you watch them, you buy some tickets to go into the games. They don't care. They don't care at all. And they never will care, if we're being completely honest. I don't think they're going to change at any point. I don't think that's going to be any different in the years going forward, right? They just aren't good. And they understand that, and I think it's going to continue to go in that direction. So there's nothing that the fans can do. There's nothing that the people that support this team, right, the people that try to get in, buy seats, buy tickets, there's nothing that they can do, no boycotts that can be had, that's going to change this organization. They don't care, and they're not going to care forever. And that's just kind of the unfortunate reality of the situation.